Good evening, everyone. We'll call the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee to order. I'd like to welcome everyone here in the chambers and those watching electronically from the comfort of their homes. Today, we acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We are thankful to share in the special spirit of this place, rich in the energy of Mother Earth, our ancestors, and the love of all creation. First up, we have the adoption of the agenda, that the content of the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee agenda for May 22nd, 2019 be adopted as presented. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Doherty, Deputy Mayor Hall. Any additions or other offerings? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Is there any business arising from our previous meeting? Moving on, we have no deputations this evening, so we will get right to work on staff reports. And our planning department has been quite busy here, so 6.1 is first up. P 2019-25, part law control exemption bylaw for Riverside, George Zubeck Drive, Collins Street, blocks 3, 4, 5, and 6, 51M, 1124. And Director Farr, have you got a presentation there for us?
Sure. Thank you. Briefly, this is a part lot control application that facilitates the creation of a number of lots for residential construction. It's simply an administrative form of a land division in compliance with the zoning bylaw, and will facilitate the construction of residential development in the area.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not seeing anybody in the gallery to come up and speak to this matter. I will put the motion on the floor that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee receive and refer the following recommendation to the next meeting of council. The staff report P 2019-25 be received, and council enact and pass the part lot control exemption bylaw to allow for 18 lots to be created within blocks 3, 4, 5, and 6 of registered plan 51M 1124. Mover and a seconder, Councillor Hamlin, Councillor Doherty. Comments, questions with respect to this report? Perfect. Seeing none. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, so next, 6.2 is P 2019-24. It's discharge of site plan agreement, 110455 Ontario Inc., Van Dolder, and it's from registered plan 51M 1154. So Director Farr, if you could just give us the overview of this, please.
Again, this is primarily an administrative matter. This is intended to clean up the number of site plan agreements that are registered on this property. When the site plan agreement is discharged, a subdivision agreement will remain, which gives guidance to future site plans in the area. The site plan agreements will be registered on the property. Occasionally, when there are too many instruments registered on a property, it creates confusion among the lawyers and the town's lawyer, applicant's lawyer, and this will create some efficiencies that will eliminate some bureaucratic redundancies.
Okay, excellent. All right, so that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee receive and refer the following recommendation to the next meeting of council. The council authorize a discharge of the site plan agreement from blocks 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and Greco Court Registered Plan 51M 1154, Van Dolder Industrial Subdivision. Mover and a seconder, please. Deputy Mayor Hall, Councillor Doherty, questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Doherty.
So we're to assume that there will be other plans coming forward speaking to each one of those lots. Is that correct?
To Director Farr, yeah.
Through the chair, Councillor Doherty, yes, in fact, this area is an area of active interest for industrial development in the town.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so if there's no other questions or comments, all those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Our next report is P 2019-22, and it's to enact a new building bylaw and permit fees. So I will ask Greg, I probably believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Deputy Mayor Hall and Council and members of committee. I'm pleased to represent the report for the proposed new building bylaw. As previously reported to Council, the purpose of the implementing a new bylaw is to align with our current legislative requirements. The bylaw has not been updated in some time. Also, with respect to permit fees, we're not looking at increasing our current permit fees. With respect to public input, notice of a public meeting was given in accordance with the Building Code Act. We held a public meeting on April 29th, and since the public meeting, we've had no comments received. So with that, Madam Chair, would certainly recommend the committee to recommend the Council to adopt and enact a new building bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so there's no one in the public to speak to this matter, so our motion is that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee receive and refer the following recommendation to the next meeting of Council. The Council receives staff report P 2019-22 entitled Enact a New Building Bylaw and Permit Fees. The Council enact a new building bylaw and permit fees attached to this report, and the Council repeal bylaw number 2005-033 as amended. Mover and a seconder, please. Deputy Mayor Hall, Councillor Hamlin. Questions or comments in regard to this report? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Are there any new or substantially different procedures that are recommended as a result of or included in this bylaw?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, there are a number of substantial changes the way in which we administer the building permit process. There are more requirements as far as plans and specifications go. That again just aligns with the requirements of the Ontario Building Code. That deals with the administrative aspect. We have implemented criteria within the building bylaw for infill development, specifically top of foundation wall elevations. So within this bylaw, it will be a requirement, if you are building a new house, that you will be required to provide to us the top of foundation elevations. And we'll be ensuring that conforms within certain criteria of what we issue the building permit for. So for example, if the elevation of the building was, let's say, a datum of 250 and it came in of 260, well obviously there's some discrepancies, so we'll be following up on those. So that's one of the main items I can think of. It basically, the bylaw really outlines on paper what we currently do, but we just have to have it in place to give us legislative authority to actually do that. So hopefully that answers your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you. So just further to that line of questioning, we have had some issues in the past with infill development that ultimately really was not appropriate to the surrounding neighborhood. So will these changes capture some of the issues that were involved?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. There are additional requirements, not just with respect to building code. As you're aware, it has to conform to the zoning bylaw as well. Director Bark could probably comment more on that, but this would deal just specifically with the building code aspect with respect to the height of the foundation and so forth. So that, the only other thing I can think of is the grading plan. We have provisions within the bylaw to submit the grading plan. So that becomes part of our building permit file, if you will, and it has to conform with that. So that would be the extent of it. So.
Thank you.
Director Farr, did you have anything you would like to add to that?
Through the chair, Councillor Doherty, the siting, the height, the dimensions of a structure on a property are governed by the zoning bylaw, and so any interest in further exploring those issues would have to be in the context of an examination of the zoning bylaw, potentially related official land policy.
Great, thank you. Look forward to that too.
Councillor Hamlin, see?
I noticed one of the provisions in the bylaw provides for penalties if someone constructs or demolishes or changes a use without the benefit of a permit in hand, and that the penalty can be upwards of $5,000. And then I noticed in the subsequent report, there is actually a fair amount of that seems to go on in Collingwood. So my question is simply whether that might be something, the fact that if you construct, let's just say without a permit, you can be fined up to $5,000. Should be something we could advertise in some fashion or put out notices.
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a good point. The fines for building without the benefit of a building permit under the Building Code Act is quite a bit higher than $5,000. The first offense is upwards of $50,000 and over $100,000 for a corporation. I've never seen fines of that magnitude. With respect to our compliance philosophy, we encourage voluntary compliance. There will be from time to time when people will build without the benefit of a building permit. We've had one incident recently where a builder constructed footings without proper inspections. So we did proceed with charges. We haven't gone to court yet, but that is unfortunately is the case. So yeah, I certainly agree that we can certainly put some notice in the media and the town website with that. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right, so if there's no other comments or questions, then I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. All right, so our next up is P 2019-23, which is the request for a new plans examiner position. And maybe Director Farr, did you want to set this up for our chief building official there?
Well, I know that through the chair, the chief building official has gone into significant detail providing a rationale for the proposed new position. Clearly in the community there's a need and demand for the service that this position would fulfill, and there's a stream of benefits that flow from that I think have been articulated quite clearly in the report, including improved timeliness of decisions, the scope, managing the scope and complexity of the permits that come before the building department or division, of the level and I guess service quality that the department overall is seeking to provide on behalf of the municipality, and I guess I would heartily endorse the quality of the review that Mr. Miller has conducted, and recommend strongly that the position be recommended for approval by council. I just thought
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Good evening. I'm pleased to present the report for the new plan examiner position within the town's Ontario Building Code program. I understand it's a lengthy and in-depth report. However, I want to provide as much information to the committee and council as possible. I'll go over briefly some of the highlights from the report, and of course I'll take any questions afterwards. As mentioned in the report, the town's Building Service Division, we provide a very important service to the public by ensuring that buildings are constructed to meet the minimum health and safety standards of the Ontario Building Code. Safe construction is obviously paramount, and due diligence is exercised in enforcing the building code. In doing so, it avoids municipal exposure to liability and of course injury to the public. We accomplish this by reviewing building permit drawings, the applications, conducting routine inspections, enforcing the minimum standards of the building code, and of course we enforce for non-compliance as well in securing unsafe buildings. So that's the primary role of our qualified building inspectors within the building code program. In addition to our building code mandate, we also administer several town bylaws, including the civic addressing bylaw, fences, the sign permit, as well as the swimming pool enclosure bylaw. With respect to service standards, we are required by legislation, which is the Ontario Building Code, to respond to an applicant within certain timeframes, and that depends on the type of the building. For example, houses and small residential projects, we have to provide a response within 10 business days. Not only that, we have to provide all the reasons of why we refuse or deny that applicant to that person. A large building, such as an industrial building, we are mandated to respond within 20 business days. And within this report that is outlined in Table 1, that's the report timeframes. The other service standard that we have is that we are required by the Ontario Building Code, upon the receipt of a notice for a building inspection, a building inspector must attend the site within 2 business days or 48 hours. So that's the minimum legislative standards that of which we have to operate in. In order to meet the required timeframes, the council is required under the Building Code Act to appoint a chief building official and as many inspectors as necessary. So what this report is attempting to clarify is an answer of how many inspectors are necessary. In answering that question, there are a number of considerations of which this report highlights as well. As you're aware, our permit activity is, as highlighted, we're experiencing record volumes of building permits. On average, 750 building permits per year have been issued in the past 3 years. Prior to that, we saw levels of around 500 permits. So we are seeing an increase of 50% of permits being issued, which is quite a bit. We're also currently experiencing the highest volume inspections on record, with a 12-month accumulated inspections of well over 4,200 inspections, and this continues to increase on a monthly basis. Past month alone, we'll see that 12-month accumulated inspections over 4,300. In 2018, our staffing levels were 3.65 full-time equivalent, with approximately 260. In 2018, our staffing levels were 3.65 full-time equivalents, with approximately 260 building permits issued per staff. With the analysis and current projections for 2019 and beyond, we'll see that increased over 300 permits issued per staff. With that, a further detailed analysis indicates that approximately 6,500 hours would be required to process those permit applications, including administration, plan examination, building inspections, and enforcement. However, with our staff complement, those hours, available hours are 4,800. So what that means is that building services will be operating at a 137% capacity, which is not sustainable. With the current volume and projected volume, the town's Ontario Building program should be operating at 5 full-time equivalents. The end result of this, with the permit volume and inspection volume, is that our staff are finding it increasingly difficult to manage both plan examination and inspection duties, and to maintain our legislated timeframes within the Ontario Building Code. We have a fair amount of open building permit files, and we have not been carrying out our legislative duties with respect to enforcement under the Building Code Act, for example, constructing without a permit. As I mentioned before, the town continues to experience strong development growth, which is a good thing, but also it brings us some other solutions that we need to address. The current staffing complement at this time would render the town unable to meet the minimum service levels legislated. Obviously, this is a concern from both the building and development industry, and is from a risk management perspective. With the request this evening for a new plan examiner, the impact on town finances, this will be solely within our permit fee revenue. There will be no impact on the taxpayer. So with that, Madam Chair, we're recommending the council to support this request and to maintain our legislative requirements under the Building Code Act. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. That was a very thorough and excellent report that you provided to us in writing, and an explanation for the public this evening. Seeing no one from the public that wishes to speak to this matter, I'm simply going to put the motion on the floor that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee receive and refer the following recommendation to the next meeting of council. The council receives staff report P 2019-23 entitled Request for a New Plans Examiner Position, and that council direct the chief building official to proceed with the recruitment of a full-time plans examiner position. Mover and a seconder, please. Deputy Mayor Hall, Councillor Doherty. Questions and comments? Councillor Doherty?
Thank you very much. I almost called you your worship.
No,
your,
don't want that
your
stress.
chairpersonship. Thank you very much. This is an excellent report, extremely well rationalized. The question I have is, you know, we are, a lot of this is being driven by applications for new builds. New builds ultimately are driven by the marketplace. And so I'm wondering what consideration has been given if we begin to see a decline in applications for new builds in the community.
Thank you. So who would like to answer that question? I actually had that on my list as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a very good question. With respect to the developments that we currently have approved, over the next few years, 2 to 5 years, we will see significant building permit activity. What would happen after that if we see a decline? We will certainly have to assess that, but for the near future, I can see the permit activity remaining at a very strong activity.
Thank you.
That answers? That's good. Any other questions or comments? I had a couple, so I don't want to supersede anybody. So I do agree with Councillor Doherty's question. I think that the housing market and the economy in general are unpredictable. So, you know, in terms of where we're at with staffing and how that all works out, I know that CEO Min had given me an answer with respect to that, and it's something that we just simply monitor as we go along. I don't know if you had any other comments you wanted to add, Mr. CEO?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just in response to that question, I mean, I think there are two responses. One is we could potentially look at contracting out the service in the short term, which we did. So we can have a third party provide that service, but that third party provider wouldn't necessarily subscribe to the same standards and quality that we expect. So we have initially, because this request came to me before, and the interim response was to try and see if we can get a third party to provide it to us, so we're not sort of tied into a longer term relationship. Second option was to look at a full-time employee, but on a contract basis. The challenge with that is that we may not be able to attract the caliber of applicant that we're looking for. So we decided to go with the full-time permanent employee. The other response I would add as well is that with the creation of the new investigation and enforcement cluster, any flexibility that we have in this position could support the bylaw enforcement side as well. So the flexibility created in that organization could support the new bylaw officers that this unit now support. So that's the rationale for finally deciding to go with the permanent full-time, was the inability to attract a qualified, credible candidate, the difficulties in contracting out in the short term, and thirdly, if there is any flexibility that we could potentially accommodate that flexibility on the enforcement side.
Thank you. Through you to the CAO. So will this person be hired with a view to looking for qualifications to handle either a bylaw enforcement or a building official function?
Well, one of the things we're looking at in the new organization is the potential for cross-training. And so when we recruit, this is going to be something that I think we will pursue. And also, even if the individual doesn't have the capacity initially, we're going to look at opportunities for providing additional training, as we are right now with the bylaw officers who are actually moving over to the building division. That option was also explored to see if we could potentially cross-train one of the bylaw officers, but the length of time it would take to do that didn't facilitate us being able to put that in place in time to have this vacancy filled. So there were a lot of considerations that went into the discussion before we eventually decided to come to council. I mean, so from a risk point of view, I think the risk is fairly minimal, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and then the other question I guess I had, we talked about contracting it out and we talked about a full-time position. The other question I had was in terms of a contract position going forward. Given a lot of the things that we have going on in terms of a regional governance review, we don't know where we're going to land in that going forward, and so I'm just wondering. I know there are challenges with that, but I was just wondering about your opinion on that, Mr. CAO.
Yeah, thank you. My view would be that, we've tried these contract positions before and we're not able to attract the caliber of candidates or the commitment from the candidates. So we could potentially go for a one-year contract, and we have, not in this division, but we have in other parts of the organization. And we had to come back to council at least on one or two occasions to request that that position be converted into more of a full-time position. So, if it's will of council for us to look at a temporary full-time position, we'll certainly look at it. But I think it does limit our ability to recruit the right person.
All right, I get the sense from this department anyway that it's not as critical, and I think I'll move that question over to SIC for an overall application to all of our departments moving forward. And then my other question was, in view of our affordable and attainable housing challenges, I'm assuming in these decisions within the building costs that we assess the impact on the cost of housing going forward, because all the increases we do are passed along to the buyers. So although developers build what they can sell, there's an impact for us going forward in that we're simply increasing the pricing of our housing stock. I'm assuming that this impact would be not negligible within what we're looking at today, but I'm just wondering if that goes into our assessment. And maybe through to Director Farr.
So, speaking as a director of the planning building department, we're always looking for efficiencies that improve the speed and the effectiveness of the development approvals process. We're involved in that right now on an ongoing basis. In the totality of a project, construction project, fees generally are very small, like processing and permitting approval fees, even planning fees, form a very small percentage of the total project cost. I think collectively in our respective professions, we're aware that the approvals process is only a small process of the overall steps in total project involved in bringing a project and housing supply to market. So there's multiple variables in places along the way where costs are incurred and can be reduced, and the system can be made more efficient. I think in the totality of a project, building costs, although a factor, and particularly the review costs that are involved in their attention of this position, are just minimal to the point that they would not register significantly on a project cost. The benefits, though, in terms of moving the process forward and achieving more timely permitting, I think are inestimable in terms of project mobilization, in terms of synchronicity with a development project as it moves through the different stages. So I don't think that is a significant factor associated with this proposed position.
Okay. Thank you very much. So those are my questions. If seeing no others, then I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. That was great work. All right, so now we are on to agenda item number 7, reports, minutes of other committees and boards. 7.1, that the development and and there's no one from the public to ask a question on this anyway. Oh, sorry, Councilor Doherty?
The building permit summary?
That's the next one.
Oh, sorry.
You're right.
Oh,
I'm okay.
My
Okay.
apologies.
Okay, that's okay. So that the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee receive and refer the following committee minutes to the next regular meeting of council, and they are the Council Heritage Committee minutes from May 1st, 2019. I'll move in a seconder, please. Councilor Hamlin, Deputy Mayor Hall. Any comments with respect to the minutes, concerns, follow-up? Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, and I think this may be through you to Director Farr. I see that there was, or there will be an update on property standards relative to the Victoria Annex. I'm just wondering if you are able to provide an update to us in regard to the town's application for a heritage designation for that building.
Through the chair, Councillor Doherty, the designation of this property is a matter that is currently under appeal and before the Heritage Conservation Review Board. And staff are in discussion with the applicant on ways of resolving that appeal and advancing the designation of the property. There is a concurrent issue, which is property standards order that was applied to that property. We have been working collaboratively, Mr. Miller and I, and ensuring that the appropriate property standards order is in place to ensure security of the building without prejudicing the town's ability to ensure that the property is brought up to the heritage standard. We're a little concerned that there could be conflicting orders on the property insofar as one order may not achieve the heritage standard that we want, while that matter is being actively, the resolution of the matter is actively being pursued. But Mr. Miller's been looking into it. Do you want to provide additional comments?
Thank you through Madam Chair. I think Director Farr has captured very well. I'll certainly circle back with the owner. He is a builder in the area, so I think I'll just simply have a conversation, express our concerns with securing the building and especially preventing further damage from weather. I think that would be the key. So I'll certainly follow up and report back to the Heritage Committee. I understand they have a meeting coming up in June, so I'll certainly provide an update on that as well.
Thank you. We've also had a concern expressed from the ACO Collingwood branch in regard to the state of the building, so that's good to hear.
Okay, no other questions? Welcome, Mayor Saunderson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies for being late. I was at a county event.
No problem, we saved item 8 for you as soon as we vote on this. Okay, all those in favor of the minutes? And that is carried unanimously, thank you. All right, so now we're on to departmental updates and discussion. And firstly, we have the building permit summary, the 2019 permit summary update. Our Chief Building Official, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The memos before you, there's a lot of numbers there. I won't go into great detail with the numbers, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Again, we've experiencing very strong building permit activity. We've issued 95 building permits. That was a construction value of almost $32 million. That's in comparison to 39 building permits and $2 million during the same period in 2018. So we are experiencing significant growth. Again, inspections, year to date, just under 1,374 inspections were completed compared to 791, and that represents a 74% increase. So that's a fairly significant increase in our activity. What basically is driving the increased number of inspections? We have started to issue the building permits for the Eden Oak homes within the Indigo Estate subdivision. They have applied for 160 permits, so those permits will be issued. Majority of those probably within the next month or two. So they're quite busy on that site. Again, we've had a fairly significant increase in number of dwellings, again, due to the Eden Oak site. We also issued the Holiday Inn permit last month, which is a $10 million project. And with that, Madam Chair, that would be my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions? Deputy Mayor Hall?
Thank you. I think the question has been answered, but just for clarification specific to the numbers. So if you backed out the construction value of the Holiday Inn, it's closer to 21 million and change. and the permits issue would be 94, so that's the one substantive issue. Okay,
That's correct, yes.
all right.
Thank you. All right, is there any further updates from the planning department? We've pretty well covered off your agenda items this evening. Anything further? No? Okay. Any other departments? We didn't have anything on our list here for departmental updates. I do have one question through to Director McDonald. Does anybody else have any questions from any other departments? No? Okay. So Director McDonald, I asked today regarding the speed signs that flash, and I know I've been out Mountain Road a couple times the past week, and the ones out there aren't working. And I remember a conversation, I think in our committee, about adding to our inventory of those signs. So I was just wondering if Director McDonald could just give us an update on those.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, the two on Mountain Road are battery powered, and we've purchased solar panels to augment the battery power so we don't have to go and change them, and depending on the traffic volume and number of times that sign gets used, it can deplete its batteries quicker than a week. So we're currently waiting on the electrician to hook up the solar panels, so that will then function regularly. In terms of our other inventory, we have two rotating signs that we rotate around the municipality. The person that's assigned that was off on medical leave, and he's now back, and so we anticipate getting that program up and going in the next week. And we are also looking at through our sign budget in our ability to purchase 2 additional signs, and that will depend on our outcomes of our sign inspections. We have to do reflectometer sign inspections, and if our numbers of sign replacements are down, we'll have room to purchase 2 additional signs.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, anything else? Seeing none then. Public delegations, seeing none. Other business, any other members have it? Mayor Saunderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow up, or apropos of the county tours today. We were in Collingwood for part of the day, and we toured the $40 million affordable housing complex, and Building A has actually already been completed ahead of schedule and under budget, and it is now occupied by, I think, roughly 50% of the occupants. They're moving in, I think, at least two occupants per day, or 2 apartment units per day, and they are ahead of schedule on the B building. So that is all good news, and having been inside the buildings and viewed some of the units and the facility, it's fantastic. And I understand Ontario Works and Canadian Mental Health and the Board of Education will also be moving in on the ground floor of Building B, so it will become certainly a hub for that area and serving that population.
Okay. Good news. All right, anybody else with anything? If not, oh, sorry, yep, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, my apologies. I've got two things I'd just like to raise, and perhaps I should have raised them under number 8, departmental updates or discussion. But if I may, could I bring them up now?
Absolutely.
You can direct accordingly. So, through the chair, I'd like to sort of make 2 general observations and then ask if staff could review, and I'd be happy to forward some additional comments, and then they can take it as they see appropriate. But the comments are being derived from a couple of public meetings that we've had, as well as presentations that have been made with this council as it relates to development activity, and specific to the reports that are either being presented through staff, but more, I think, from the applicant themselves. I'd love to be able to see some more details that relates to the clarity. So for example, with housing, if it's a development application, or it can apply to commercial as well, specifics to whether it's units that are being purchased versus rental or a combination, and the specifics, further clarity in terms of the breakdown, the type of units, some people confuse back and forth whether it's a condominium apartment, for example. In other municipalities, the term apartment is more readily used when it actually is referencing a condo. And so I think more clarity as to the specifics, and that could easily be done by just identifying whether it's a unit that's for sale versus for rent. I'd love to have a one-liner in there that clearly denotes whether the development or developer is proposing to have any type of attainable or below market housing within their development. And then the market rates that they are projecting. Obviously, if somebody is coming to the table for the first time, market rates will fluctuate by the time that they actually go to the market, but it will at least give some idea or some projection. So that's one comment, because I do think that there have been some questions, not only from the public at the meetings away from the council table, but around the table itself, that relate to simple matters of clarity. And then the other I would ask, maybe through to whoever deemed appropriate, is that we've had a couple of presentations where reference to the 100-year storm is made. And you know, my background is not in geography or science, but I think it's quite clear that the data today is, as it relates to the 100-year storm, is becoming more and more irrelevant. And I'd like to request that reports that come forward reference that from an historical standpoint, but I'd really like to see the data as it relates to the last 10 years.
All right, so Director Farr, are you comfortable in getting back to the committee with some of that information at our next meeting or something, and give us an idea of how we can maybe limit the duplication of questions by answering them ahead of time, if we know they're going to be asked anyway? And then the other thing I have to add to that is I think there's a complication at what point the developer has to determine whether it's going to be a condominium or units for sale. Because I know early in the process, there's no point in asking that question, because they don't have to decide until a point down the road. So, and you can help me recall at what point that is. Yeah, Deputy Mayor, you want to add something?
If I may, one last item separate from the first two. As a result, because I may have compounded the issue this morning, I was on the PKFM this morning on behalf of the mayor with the weekly update, and those in the public have probably recognized, as everybody has around the table, that the hoarding around the Monaco project, former Admiral development site, has changed. And in my enthusiasm for the development moving forward, I'm not sure what I said, to be quite honest. I'll have to go back and listen to the tape, but if I could, through you, Chair, to maybe Mr. Miller, if he could just clarify what's been publicly sort of stated and what in fact has actually transpired as it relates to that development.
Sure. Yeah. Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know it's been reported in the media that we have issued a building permit. We have not issued a building permit. What transpired last week was the developer came in and paid for their building permit fee, which I required before we would process the application any further. There still are required to, and Director Farr can to speak more of this, but there are planning approvals that are required and amending agreements and so forth before I can even issue a building permit for the main building, or even permits with respect to shoring and for excavation and so forth. So that's the status of the building permit application. With respect to hoarding, the changes, I can certainly follow up if it conforms with the sign bylaw, but that's the status of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a good question. Thank you. All right. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question through you, Madam Chair, to Director Farr. What planning approvals might still be required for that site?
So through the chair, Councillor Hanlon, the site plan application that's being reviewed, and it needs to be approved. I don't know the status of the condominium application associated with that property, but I can look into it further.
Thank you. I was wondering if there was something more in the nature of variances, but if it's site plan, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. So if there's no other matters, I will ask someone to move adjournment. You all want to stay? Councillor Doherty, thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.